The war continues in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. Sadly, thousands of civilians have already lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands of others have lost their homes and have since been displaced. Now, to talk about the volatile situation in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and the host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, there are reports that some of the rockets being fired by Hamas over Gaza into Israel simply didn't have the range Hamas thought and are actually falling short, landing on their own people, the Palestinians. And there are reports now that Hamas is blaming Israel for those deaths.
Yeah, of course. Trademark of Hamas and unfortunately Palestinian leadership for a very long time has been to exactly use their people as political pawns. And that means putting them in harm's way, telling them not to evacuate, putting weapons in schools, indoctrinating their children. And of course, as you mentioned, literally killing them with their own weapons by having their rockets land in civilian areas. Because at the end of the day, it's not the people that matter, but the narrative. And the narrative will be pushed further if that death toll climbs, if they have bloody pictures that are often doctored, by the way. And of course, in this case, dying by their own hands, meaning that these are weapons of Hamas that are landing in civilian areas. Opposite of that, you have the Israelis that value life, every single life being obviously very, very sacred, and loss of even one life. And that is the problem with the coverage that we're seeing in the mainstream media right now. It's people are dying on both sides, which is absolutely true. We do value life on both sides, but they're dying in very different ways. Whereas Hamas came in and actually targeted children, babies, families, civilians, because they're cowards. They're not going up against the military. And on the other end, you have retaliatory strikes by the Israelis trying to evacuate civilian areas, handing out leaflets, making the announcements, trying to use the UN as a mediator to get people out of harm's way, because that is not the goal of the Israelis. It's not to kill civilians. And this is very much lost on the mainstream media. It's very much lost on the protesters that are on the streets of Canada and the United States all weekend, calling for an end to the Jewish state, calling for from the river to the sea. These are genocidal calls that, again, rooted in slogans, hatred, just anti-Semitism, and of course, not knowing the facts, the history, the context of what's going on right now.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of those rallies in support of Israel and Hamas in just a moment here. But Lisa, we saw some lone wolf attacks in many countries of the world showing their support of Hamas, and the FBI is warning that more may be forthcoming.
Right. And it's very troublesome, of course, here in the United States with our porous border. And we already know that over the last year, we have had thousands of individuals come over who have been detected on the FBI's most wanted list. And how that's not even considering the getaways, those who have not come under law enforcement's scrutiny to know that whether or not they're on the FBI's most wanted list or not. So obviously, we have that vulnerability here. We know that they trickle up north into Canada as well. This immigration issue in North America is not just for the United States, but we know that we share that border with Canada, and it affects you there too. The other thing that's very, very important here to note is for those who believe this is actually over land policy, a blockade, a two-state solution, the fact that Hamas announced a day of rage, basically a day of jihad around the world, asking its followers to attack anyone who is a non-believer, not just Jews, by the way, anyone who's a non-believer. That's Christians, Jews, atheists, even moderate Muslims who do not fold under the flag of Hamas, and that is most Muslims. So they are asking them to attack, and we saw two such attacks, one in Beijing and one in France, where a teacher was killed by a terrorist who was yelling Allah Akbar as he was stabbing her and killing her. Again, it's not about any of the policies. And for those who want to talk about, Israeli treatment of Palestinians, and we can get into that for another day, there are talking points for that as well. Just understand what Hamas is doing. They are terrorizing the world. Israel is left alone to fight this for the rest of the freedom-loving world. And that is why it's so important to really understand the context of this war.
We also heard a report as well about a white man who attacked this Muslim boy and stabbed him over 20 times and attacked his mother too. So it's horrific what's happening on both sides. Lisa, why does it appear that Israeli intelligence may have been lacking with Hamas attacks. You would have thought maybe the Israeli government would have known something was coming.
Right. And I'm sure that in the days to come, we will have more intelligence. But for right now, they're just calling it an intelligence failure. It doesn't really sit well with me. I've been covering this part of the world for a very long time. And Israeli intelligence is top notch because it has to be. They can't really let their hair down for a moment or look the other way. And a lot of the justifications or the reasonings that we're hearing, about it being a weekend, being a holiday, domestic turmoil inside Israel. National security never has to do with those kinds of things because, again, they know they're surrounded by enemies who want them dead at any hour. It's something that they have always been focused on. And how, when you look at the minuscule terror plots that Israel has foiled in places like Cyprus and Greece and all over the world, and even in helping the United States in foiling some of our terror plots here, it doesn't really make sense that Israel would have missed this one. And the United States as well, by the way. The United States has admitted to also not knowing anything about this, not having any intel on it. So I think in the days and months to come, we're going to hear more perhaps about this. I know there's going to be plenty of investigations. And I will say this, though, the complexity, the severity, the sophistication of this is nothing like, it's not anything what Israel has seen or dealt with in the past with regards to Hamas or any other terror organization. Shows the fact that Iran's regime was pulling the puppet strings on this one. The scope of this was so tremendously large, well plotted, and it was meant to be a surprise attack, land, air, sea, and that has partially to do with it. But again, we'll find out why Israel had no clue that this was happening right under their noses.
Canada's flying Canadians out of Israel right now, and the U.S. State Department is evacuating around 32,000 U.S. citizens who are seeking to leave both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank.
Yes, it's very important that the United States be proactive about this. They've been actually dragging their feet a bit. A lot of people are against bringing people into the United States any more than we have to, right? At this point, we have, important to get American citizens out first and foremost, and then deal with the refugee issue as a secondary issue. We know that 30 Americans have died in the attacks, and we are believing at this point, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, that there are Americans among the hostages as well that are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. And so, the United States obviously as a priority is keeping an eye on those hostages, on the Americans who are in harm's way, and dealing with that right now.
Yeah, sadly, a handful of Canadians also died during that attack by Hamas. Lisa, a report by Axios says Iran is warning it will intervene if Israel launches a ground offensive in Gaza. Many believe that Iran has supported and funded Hamas for decades and views the terrorist group as a proxy that can really carry out attacks on its behalf.
Yes. So here we have Iran's regime again with the threats. And really, we're not hearing much from the White House in terms of Iran's involvement. As a matter of fact, they're trying to distance themselves from that narrative, even though they are supporting Israel and its efforts to seek, an end to Hamas as the main goal of this retaliation. We're not seeing that connection. And my question to the White House has been and will be in days to come is how will the United States now move forward with Iran's regime? Obviously wanting to strike a nuclear deal with them for the last 3 years under the Biden administration, loosening important sanctions that have allowed Iran's regime to sell oil and bring in revenue, $60 to $90 billion of their own, which they're putting into terrorism. And of course, ignoring the Iranian people who are asking for regime change. The head of this dragon, monster, whatever you want to call it, is Iran's regime. And of course, now they are threatening Israel not to escalate this war further. Look, Israel is fighting the proxies of Iran's regime. This is Iran's war against Israel, and it launched it in a way in which the world is focused on the Palestinians, the world is focused on human rights, the world is focused on Gaza and the West Bank, and the world is not understanding the main source of evil on this planet, the main source of funding suicide bombers and terrorist groups and all these different proxies is the Iran regime. And that is what's missing again from this narrative. And of course, we would like to see more from the White House on that.
Let's circle back to the rallies for just a moment here, Lisa. We've seen so many demonstrations across North America and Europe, both in support of Israel and Hamas. Now, there are reports that the House Republicans want to introduce legislation to stem the flow of Palestinians into the United States amid the Israel-Hamas war. So how's that going to happen when you want to fly 32,000 Americans in? Would you maybe have some jihadists mixed in with that group that you're flying in, not vetted properly?
Right, and that's really the challenge of any group of refugees coming into the country. But we're not talking about refugees when we talk about evacuating Americans. These are American citizens who are in Israel and hopefully will be properly vetted. The secondary group that they are talking about bringing in are refugees, moving them out of Gaza, and the world opinion is, where do they have to go? So there is this desire to bring them here, and that's where you have a lot of objection as to they cannot be properly vetted. You're not able to call Gaza and get a reference or background check on any given individual, right? So it makes it very difficult. And again, I will say, when you have national security issues like this, there will always be those who are well-intentioned and are in need of humanitarian aid and in need of rescue that will perhaps be grouped together with the one or two bad apples that could be in that group. So that is why the discussion now is, we cannot vet them properly. We cannot take that chance in terms of national security to bring any extremists or terrorists into the country.
Lisa, several Harvard Divinity School faculty members sent out a statement condemning Israel's oppression of Palestinians following the terrorist attacks. Now, Harvard's president, however, came out against a joint statement from over 30 student groups, saying it did not represent the views of the university after the college faced heavy criticism for not condemning Hamas in the attacks.
Yeah, it's horrific what we're seeing in U.S. Universities. Top U.S. universities, I just read an article about a Columbia professor who called the Hamas attack against Israeli civilians awesome. He called it awesome. There will be an investigation, obviously, but what we are seeing is these are mostly student organizations, although there are professors involved as well. But Hal, you and I for years have talked about professors at universities being the ones who are perpetrating these ideas of anti-Semitism, masking it under anti-Zionism, not wanting a state of Israel, or talking about apartheid, or talking about all the political statements, but truly teaching and indoctrinating students with this feeling of anti-Semitism. U.S. colleges are the #1 breeding center for anti-Semitism, and that continues, of course, with this war. Imagine professors on U.S. soil living freely saying that an attack like Hamas, terror attack, was awesome. Imagine someone saying 9/11 was awesome. I mean, it is horrific to think. Imagine someone saying ISIS is awesome. It is so irresponsible, and I'm glad that the heads of some of these universities are taking really, and of course, Hal, I must say, it comes after a lot of pressure has been put on these universities. A lot of donations have been pulled, and a lot of bad press for them to come out with these statements, which is very unfortunate, because I think these statements should have been issued immediately, because nobody believes that Hamas, or a terror organization, killing innocent civilians and beheading babies is awesome. It's truly a sad day in America. I will say this. When I see Iranians inside Iran, when I see Palestinians inside Gaza or the West Bank saying that they denounce Hamas, that they denounce the Iran regime, that is the silver lining for me. Somebody who's been covering this area for a long time and seeing this coming of age, where they understand there's a difference. You take a side. Either you're with the terrorists or you're not. And to see American professors, college students, I mean, there was a rally here close to UCLA on Saturday, where they were actually saying 6 million wasn't enough. We're coming for the rest of you. We're saying we want all of 48. That was one of their slogans as well. They're literally calling for a genocide of Jews in 2023 in the United States. Spoiled, privileged, uneducated, American students who do not know any better. And it's unfortunate when their professors are leading the way.
Lisa, we only have a few moments left here, but I wanted to get an update from you on the war in Ukraine. Any end in sight? Are there any peace talks planned between Ukraine's Zelensky and Russia's Putin?
We're not, I mean, what I've been reading in the last 12 hours has been more escalation. Those numbers climbing in terms of weapons, artillery, new shipment, by the way, Hal, that's the latest from North Korea to the Russians. They're getting, more weapons, buying more, finding new trade partners to buy weapons from. And Zelensky's hand is extended, wanting more and more money from the United States. There was early on a bill that tried to put together funding for the IDF, Israel's forces. And as we know, the Biden administration really said that they would give Israel Israel more in terms of fighting this war against Hamas, but wanted to buddy that together with more money for Ukraine. I mean, talk about politics as usual in Washington, D.C., but trying to combine those two ideas and try to pass something, because obviously they know that a lot of lawmakers are very eager to get that funding to Israel. The jig is up. I think after the UN meetings, Zelensky saw that the sentiment in the United States, even those who wanted for a very long time to send more and more money to Ukraine, understand that enough is enough, and there has to be some sort of de-escalation in this war, and putting more money into it is not the way. So we shall see.
She's the host of The Foreign Desk and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Thanks so much for joining us once again from Los Angeles.
My pleasure. Thank you, Hal.